Okay, we're continuing with the crash course in Jewish history, and in the last video we covered the 1-minute map to Jewish history, in which we identified 4 distinct phases of our history right from the very beginning of time until modern times and the establishment of the State of Israel. Now you can see the first phase, that of Jewish civilization, is a very long period. In fact, we're going to include 2,000 years here in which there were no Jews yet around, and we'll discuss why that was incorporated into our history. We'll see why that's relevant. But I'm going to give you now a very simple way to get the breakdown clear of this phase, and we're going to use this breakdown as our framework throughout this course, so you'll be amazed with how you'll be able to remember the timeline in this initial phase, which covers ancient history. So here goes. So I'm now going to give you a very simple way to remember the breakdown of 4,300 years of Jewish history. And remember, there's going to be a lot of details we're not going to cover here, but the goal at this point is to master the framework, because we're going to use this to build our understanding step by step. So here goes. All you have to do to remember 4,300 years of history is to remember these numbers: 1,000, 1,000, 500, 1,000. That's it, 1,000, 1,000, 500, 1,000. If you can remember 1,000, 1,000, 500, 1,000, that's 3,500 years right there. So let's do a little review. The numbers are 1,000, 1,000, 500, 1,000. Okay, so here's the breakdown. It was 1,000 years from Adam to Noah. Adam is the first man, and Noah is his 10th generation descendant. He's going to be the one to survive the flood and rebuild the world. It was 1,000 years from Noah to Abraham. Abraham is a 10th generation descendant of Noah. So it was 1,000 years from Adam to Noah, and 1,000 years from Noah to Abraham. It was 500 years from Abraham until the giving of the Torah. And that's an exact 500 years from Abraham's birth until the Jews are standing at Mount Sinai hearing the 10 commandments being given. And it was 1,000 years from the giving of the Torah until we had all the books of the prophets and the writings. These were works that were written over this 1,000-year period of time. This is going to cover our coming into the land of Israel for a very long time. We'll be exiled by the Babylonians. We'll end up in Babylon for 70 years, and then we'll come back. And this will be the beginning of the Second Temple period. We'll get all this organized in future videos. But over this 1,000-year period of time, prophets and the great ones amongst us wrote these works that were eventually put down. In Hebrew, they're known as Navi, for prophets, and Ktuvim, for writings. Together, the Torah, prophets, and writings in Hebrew are referred to as Tanakh. That's an acronym for Torah, Navi, and Ktuvim. Torah, Navi, and Ktuvim, that's Tanakh. So that's 1,000 years. So once again, just to review, 1,000 years from Adam to Noah, 1,000 years from Noah to Abraham. It was 500 years from Abraham to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, and that's going to be 1,000 years until we have all the books of the prophets and the writings. That's 3,500 years right there. Now, to complete the 4,300 years, we have 800 more years to go. So here goes. All you have to do is remember these two numbers: 500, 300, 500, 300. It was 500 years from when we go from the prophets and the writings until we have the Mishnah. Now, the Mishnah we're going to learn about again in a future video, but we have a tradition that goes back all the way to Sinai. When we were standing at Mount Sinai, Moses got the written Torah, and he also got the explanation of what the Torah means. That was what's known as the Oral Torah. Now, this Oral Torah was the way that the Jews learned the Torah through the next 1,000 years, the prophets and the writings, and the next 500 years. For 1,500 years, we had the books of the Torah, the prophets and the writings, and the oral tradition that was given at Sinai. Eventually, it's going to be written down in what's called the Mishnah. And we'll talk about that coming up in a future video. So I'm going to hold off. I know you're not 100% clear yet, but it's known as the Mishnah, which is our oral tradition written down. Then, 300 years later, we go from the Mishnah, and then we get the Talmud, which many people are familiar with. The Talmud is the commentary on the Mishnah. The Mishnah was written so succinctly, it's so dense with knowledge, and it needed sharp analysis to call all the depth from it. So the rabbis eventually wrote the Talmud, which is the commentary on the Mishnah. And that's going to be done right before the fall of Rome. We're going to go through all this more in detail in future videos. This is going to be our breakdown for understanding our first phase of Jewish history, the 4,300 years developing a Jewish civilization. The Jewish people being in their land with their Torah, their traditions, their laws, expressing who we are as a society amongst all the different nations and civilizations at the time. So let's review one more time, and the rest of the crash course, at least for the first phase, is going to be using this framework to guide and build our understanding. So here go. The numbers are 1,000, 1,000, 500, 1,000. And I'd like you to review with me to make sure you have it in your hands. 1,000 years from Adam to Noah. 1,000 years from Noah to Abraham. 500 years from the birth of Abraham, we get the Torah. And 1,000 years after the Torah, we have all the books of the prophets and the writings. And then we just have to remember 500, 300, 500, 300, 500 years from the prophets and the writings to the Mishnah, which is the written down oral tradition. And then 300 years later, we get the Talmud, which is the commentary on the Mishnah. And then we're going to have to enter the Middle Ages, which is going to be the second phase of Jewish history. In the upcoming videos, we're going to break down each one of these periods so you'll understand the major events and personalities, and you'll understand everything more detailed, but in context.